Welcome to episode 115 of Books and Bites. Today we are taking a deep dive into Rashid Khalidi's The Iron Cage, the story of the Palestinian struggle for statehood. Now, this deep dive for you is going to explore why, despite a long and frankly really heartbreaking history, the Palestinians have remained stateless. And we're going to be drawing a lot from Khalidi's insightful analysis in this book.
Right.
The book was first published in 2006, so it's been around for quite a while now. But it has really become a crucial text for understanding this very complex issue. Wouldn't you agree?
I would agree.
I mean, I think it's like required reading in many courses.
Oh, yeah. It's assigned pretty widely and for good reason. It's Khalidi himself is a Palestinian-American academic.
Right.
And that brings a very valuable perspective to this whole topic.
Yeah.
He blends very rigorous historical scholarship with this really personal understanding. And so you get this unique combination of insights into what is a really, really tragic story.
Absolutely. And, at the core of his analysis is this really powerful metaphor, which gives the book its title, The Iron Cage.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought maybe we could start there for our listeners because it's so central to understanding his whole argument. For you, the listener, this metaphor of the Iron Cage represents not only the physical and political constraints that have been imposed on Palestinians, but also, and I think this is really quite poignant, the limitations that have emerged from within Palestinian leadership itself.
Yeah, it's this double bind that he really digs into.
Yeah.
And it's such an effective metaphor because it really captures that sense of being trapped.
Yeah.
Right, both by external forces, but also by dynamics within your own community, which is a very, very difficult situation to be in.
It's a really, it's a powerful way to think about it. So Khalidi's work really, for you, operates as both a very detailed examination of political history, but also this really critical look at the long-term effects of colonialism.
Yeah, and that's important because it's not just a dry recounting of events.
Right.
It's an analysis of how those events have shaped the Palestinian experience and continue to shape it to this day.
Absolutely. And he really aims this analysis at anyone seeking a deeper understanding. So whether you're a scholar or a student, an activist, or simply an engaged global citizen.
Or just someone who wants to understand why this conflict has gone on for so long and continues to be so intractable.
Right.
I think this book really provides some key insights.
So the central theme, and quite a sobering one that he presents for you, the listener, is this constant interplay between external domination and internal disarray. And this interplay, he argues, has really consistently prevented Palestinian statehood. So I was hoping we could start unpacking that for you.
Okay.
Maybe starting with what Khalidi terms dual colonization.
Right.
This seems like a really foundational concept to grasp in understanding the Iron Cage. Wouldn't you agree?
It is, and it's a concept that I think a lot of people aren't familiar with. And it's key to understanding the Palestinian experience. Because he argues that Palestinians experienced a very unique form of colonization. That it wasn't just one power coming in and taking over.
Right.
But it was this two-pronged process, so to speak.
So explain what those two prongs were.
Well, the first prong was the establishment of British imperial authority through what was called the Mandate System. And this lasted from 1920 to 1948.
Right.
So after World War I, the Ottoman Empire collapsed and Palestine came under British control.
Okay.
And then the second prong happening simultaneously was the project of Zionist settlement in Palestine.
Okay.
Which gained significant momentum and support under British rule.
And so this idea of a dual colonization is so central to understanding this conflict.
It is, and I think Khalidi does a great job of laying out how this played out on the ground, the consequences that it had.
And a really key moment here for you, the listener, to understand is the Balfour Declaration of 1917.
Oh, yeah, that's absolutely crucial.
Because it promised a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. So in Khalidi's view, what's the significance of this regarding this idea of dual colonization?
Well, I think the fundamental insight and tragedy of the Balfour Declaration is this. It explicitly granted national rights to one people, while simultaneously overlooking the existing national identity of another.
The Palestinians.
The Palestinians, exactly, who at that time made up over 90% of the population.
Wow, that's a huge percentage.
It is, and it's something that often gets overlooked when people talk about this conflict.
Right.
And so this inherent imbalance that was created, essentially by a stroke of a pen by an external power really set the stage for all the conflicts that followed.
And so for you, the listener, it's crucial to understand that the British weren't simply neutral administrators.
They weren't.
Khalidi details for you how their administrative system actively favored Jewish immigration and development, and often at the direct expense of the Palestinian population.
Yeah, he talks about how, the British were very much invested in this project of creating a Jewish homeland. And they saw the Palestinians as an obstacle to that.
So the legal and institutional frameworks that were established by the British systematically marginalized Palestinians politically.
Exactly. It wasn't just about conquest. It was about silencing their voices and undermining their ability to organize and assert their own rights.
Wow.
And what's really interesting is how he points out that their resistance to this process was often framed by the British as mere rebellion against legitimate authority.
Right.
Rather than a legitimate struggle for self-determination, which is a very crucial distinction.
A crucial distinction for the listener to note.
Yes, because it really delegitimized their struggle in the eyes of the world.
And this directly leads into, I think, the next critical element that Khalidi discusses, which is this crippling of Palestinian institutions.
Right.
So it sounds like while one community was being actively supported in building the infrastructure for a future state, the other was having its capacity deliberately undermined.
That's exactly right.
So can you break down how that happened?
Well, Khalidi goes into meticulous detail about how the British actively suppressed emerging Palestinian political institutions. Organizations like the Supreme Muslim Council, the Arab Executive, and the Arab Higher Committee all faced either fragmentation co-option by the British administration or outright dismantling.
So they were being systematically stripped of any kind of political power.
That's right. And he also points to the challenges faced by leaders like Haj Amin al-Husseini, who, was arrested, exiled, faced internal disagreements within the Palestinian movement itself.
So even their own leadership was being weakened.
Yes, it was a very difficult situation to navigate.
And for you, the listener, the contrast with the Zionist movement during this same period is really stark.
Oh, it's a night and day difference.
So paint that picture for us.
Well, Zionist institutions, most notably the Jewish Agency, were allowed to flourish under British protection. They developed clear governmental structures, they established defense forces like the Haganah, and they secured significant international financial backing.
So they were building a state in waiting.
In a way, yes, they were laying the groundwork for what would become the State of Israel.
Right, and if we connect this to the bigger picture for you, the listener, we see one side actively being equipped with the tools necessary for statehood, while the other was systematically denied those very tools.
That's the key takeaway here, and it's a direct consequence of that dual colonization we were talking about earlier.
So by the time the British mandate ended, the playing field, as you can see, was anything but level.
No, it was tilted very much in favor of the Zionist movement.
And so in 1948, the Jewish community possessed the established institutional framework necessary for statehood, whereas Palestinian institutions were, through deliberate action and suppression, largely crippled or non-existent.
And this had a huge impact on the events that unfolded in 1948.
Right.
Which, of course, is known as the Nakba, the catastrophe.
And then comes 1948, a year etched in Palestinian history as Al-Nakba, the catastrophe. And Khalidi dedicates a significant portion of the book to these defining events for you. So what's so insightful about Khalidi's account of the Nakba?
Well, what's really remarkable for you to understand is the sheer comprehensiveness of his analysis. He doesn't just focus on the military aspects. He digs into the political, the social, the psychological dimensions of this event.
Right.
He describes the British withdrawal, the UN partition proposal, and then the ensuing civil war that engulfed the region. And then he goes into meticulous detail about the Israeli military operations.
Yeah.
That led to the depopulation and destruction of over 400 Palestinian villages.
Wow.
And the expulsion of approximately 750,000 Palestinians. I mean, the scale of this displacement is just staggering.
And it's absolutely central to understanding Palestinian identity and their ongoing struggle. And Khalidi doesn't shy away from examining the role of Arab actors in this catastrophe, does he?
No, he doesn't. He provides a very balanced perspective by also analyzing the failures of the Arab states, including their disunity and military shortcomings during the 1948 war.
So it wasn't solely the actions of the Zionist forces and the departing British?
No, it was a much more complex situation. There were also significant Arab miscalculations and weaknesses.
Which is important for you, the listener, to keep in mind.
Yeah, it's not a black and white story. It's a story with many shades of gray.
The psychological impact of al-Nakba must have been immense for the Palestinian people.
Oh, it was absolutely traumatic. It was a collective trauma that continues to shape Palestinian identity to this day.
And Khalidi does touch on this, doesn't he?
He does. He talks about how the loss wasn't just physical, the loss of land and homes,
Right.
but it was also a profound loss of sovereignty and a fundamental break in their national continuity.
So their whole world was shattered.
In a way, yes. And it's really hard to overstate the impact of that.
And so the Palestinian National Project, as Khalidi illustrates for you, became deeply rooted in the shared experience of exile and a sense of fragmentation that sadly persists to this day. And following 1948, the Palestinian people were dispersed across the region, becoming largely stateless refugees. And Khalidi explores this period of refuge and fragmentation in detail. So for you, the listener, to really understand this period, you have to consider how the dispersion of Palestinians across Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, the West Bank, and Gaza created a really unique and complex set of challenges.
It's a situation that's almost unprecedented in modern history, this scattering of people across multiple countries and territories.
Right, and their political voice was often overshadowed by the agendas of their host states.
Yes.
Or by the broader currents of pan-Arabism.
That were prevalent at the time.
Right.
So for a significant period, that distinct Palestinian narrative was somewhat muted on the international stage.
And then came the creation of the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO, in 1964. And Khalidi describes its initial role for you as being somewhat under the control of the Arab League.
Yeah, initially it was seen by many as a tool of the Arab states, a way for them to manage the Palestinian issue.
Okay.
But Khalidi explains this crucial transformation. That happened after the 1967 Six-Day War.
Right.
Particularly following Israel's occupation of the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem. This period marked the rise of the PLO and a more independent representative of the Palestinian people.
Yet, as Khalidi points out, internal divisions continued to plague the PLO.
Yeah, sadly, this has been a recurring theme throughout Palestinian history, this fragmentation, this lack of unity.
And so these differing ideologies and approaches of various factions, like Fatah, the Popular Front, and later the emergence of Islamist movements like Hamas, remained a significant weakness in the Palestinian struggle for a unified national strategy.
And as Khalidi emphasizes throughout the book, this fragmentation has been a recurring and damaging obstacle.
Which is really tragic because, it's almost like they're being undermined from within at the same time as they're being undermined from without.
Yeah, it's this double bind that we were talking about earlier.
Chapter 5 delves into the PLO's rise and the various constraints it faced both internally and externally under Yasser Arafat's leadership. So what are some of the notable things from that period?
What was particularly fascinating for me is tracing the PLO's journey from a relatively marginal organization to one that achieved significant international recognition in the 1970s, including obtaining UN observer status.
Yeah.
Khalidi also traces for you their relocation to Lebanon after the Black September events in Jordan in 1970,
Right.
and then their operation as both a quasi-governmental body and, at times, a militant force.
So they were really trying to walk this tightrope between diplomacy and armed struggle.
Exactly, and it was a very difficult balance to strike, especially in the context of the Cold War and all the regional dynamics that were at play.
But this period in Lebanon was also marked by really significant challenges, particularly the Israeli invasions, as Khalidi details.
The Israeli invasions, and especially the 1982 invasion of Lebanon, had a truly devastating impact, effectively shattering the PLO's operational base there.
And so Khalidi explores for you, the listener, these inherent tensions that the PLO was constantly navigating, the complex dynamic between armed struggle and diplomatic efforts, and this difficult balance between revolutionary ideology and the pragmatic necessities of realpolitik in a really challenging geopolitical landscape.
It's a classic dilemma for any national liberation movement.
Right.
How do you fight for your freedom while also trying to negotiate a peaceful settlement?
And even when the PLO made a significant shift towards negotiation, culminating in the 1988 recognition of Israel, it continued to face immense external pressure from both Israel and the United States, as well as its own persistent internal constraints.
So even when they tried to play by the rules, the game was rigged against them.
And this sets the stage for Khalidi's critical analysis of the 1993 Oslo Accords, which initially many hoped would finally lead to Palestinian statehood. However, Khalidi presents a rather different perspective for you.
Yeah, he's very critical of the Oslo Accords.
So what's his take?
Well, he argues that while they were celebrated by many as a historic breakthrough, they ultimately created the Palestinian Authority. In a position of significant and ongoing dependency, the PA relied heavily on continued Israeli goodwill, infusions of foreign aid, and crucially lacked true sovereignty over fundamental aspects like borders, vital water resources, airspace, and overall security.
So in Khalidi's view, the power that was granted to the Palestinian Authority was more symbolic in nature than truly substantive.
Exactly. He uses this term phantom sovereignty
Right.
to really capture the situation.
I like that phantom sovereignty.
It's a very evocative term, and it really gets at this idea that the PA was given the trappings of statehood,
Right.
but without any real power. They were essentially managing the occupation on behalf of Israel.
Rather than governing their own people.
Precisely.
And while this Oslo process was underway, the expansion of Israeli settlements in the West Bank continued, further complicating and undermining the prospects for a truly contiguous and viable Palestinian state.
And this is a point that Khalidi really hammers home. He argues that the Oslo Accords essentially gave Israel a green light to continue expanding settlements, while Palestinians were stuck in this endless negotiating process.
So while there was the appearance of diplomatic progress on the international stage, the tangible realities on the ground were unfortunately moving in a fundamentally opposite direction, which is just such a
tragedy.
It's a tragedy for everyone involved. And this leads us to the final chapter of the book, appropriately titled The Cage Titans, where Khalidi examines the post-Oslo realities. So set the scene for us.
Well, in this chapter, Khalidi meticulously details for you the intensification of settler colonization, the outbreak of the Second Intifada, the construction of the separation wall, and the ongoing and devastating blockade of the Gaza Strip. He argues that Palestinian leadership in this period became increasingly bureaucratized.
Right.
And in some ways, unfortunately, detached from the daily experiences of ordinary Palestinians living under occupation.
And the level of control exerted by Israel over the lives of Palestinians became even more pervasive and entrenched.
Yeah, he talks about how Israel's control became more technologically advanced and deeply entrenched through an intricate network of checkpoints, various economic restrictions that stifled Palestinian development, and the practice of targeted assassinations, so the iron cage metaphor, he argues, became an even more tangible and suffocating reality. Bureaucratic, increasingly digital, and profoundly limiting the possibilities for Palestinians, leading to a widespread sense of resignation and even despair among men.
So as we've explored, Rashid Khalidi's The Iron Cage provides a really crucial understanding of this complex history, of the Palestinian struggle for statehood. He illuminates how this interplay of external forces and internal dynamics has created this enduring and deeply challenging situation. And so the Iron Cage serves as a really powerful metaphor for you, the listener, to grasp the systemic constraints that have tragically shaped the Palestinian experience.
And it's a metaphor that I think resonates even more strongly today, given the current situation.
Absolutely.
Khalidi's work really compels you to consider the lasting implications of these deeply rooted historical dynamics. For the present and the future of the region, it's a crucial text for anyone seeking to understand the enduring complexities of this ongoing conflict.
So to delve deeper into this crucial history, grab your own copy of The Iron Cage from the link conveniently located in the description. And be sure to subscribe to Books and Bites for more insightful deep dives just like this one. So until next time,